Congresswoman and Mike will begin taking your questions. During the question portion, we will be using the Q&A function in Zoom. If you would like to ask a question, please click on the Q&A at the bottom of the screen. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and we are live streaming on Congresswoman Bonamici's YouTube page. Congresswoman, please go ahead.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for being here today. Thank you especially to my staff, Kelsey and Brenda in Oregon, and Sujit and Natalie in DC. I can't do what I do without my staff. And thank you to Mike Pierce, who you're going to hear from very soon. So it's really an honor to represent Northwest Oregon. I am now a senior member on the Education and Labor Committee, and I chair the subcommittee on Civil Rights and Human Services. Education, including the cost of higher education and addressing that cost, is a priority for me. And it's in part because of my personal story. I took a break after high school because I did not know what I wanted to do. I eventually went to community college, did it on my own. I started at Lane Community College and did that for 2 years, and then University of Oregon for 2 years, and then law school for 3 years. I was on my own. My family was not able to help with the costs, and I did this with a combination of grants and loans and work study. 7 years of higher education, and I had a very manageable amount of debt. And then after I graduated from law school, I went into public service at the Federal Trade Commission, and I still found that it was very easy to pay back my loans, and I wasn't at a law firm. I know that families and students and graduates today face a very different reality. Many states have failed to adequately invest in higher education, and costs have increased. In fact, over the last 20 years, the average cost of college tuition and fees at a public four-year institution has increased by 179%. And federal grants and loans originally were meant to pay for most of that education, but now only cover a small share, and have certainly not kept up with inflation and the rising cost of attendance. And the burden of student loan debt is a significant problem for many, and I've had many conversations around Northwest Oregon about this. Of course, the pandemic introduced additional financial strain. The student loan system has a history of not treating borrowers with flexibility and compassion. Interest capitalization is a problem. I've heard from so many people, the interest keeps accruing during the time that a student is in school or during a payment pause, and it just keeps getting added. And so many people have told me they just can't get ahead. There are also predatory practices, and also in many cases, relief programs have not been administered properly, which has been especially challenging for disadvantaged borrowers. And so for many, the debt simply is not manageable. And I've heard from people across Oregon who have expressed deep anxiety about the state of the student loan system, and talked to people who have put off life decisions and put them on hold because of student loan debt. Decisions like when to marry or have children or buy a home or buy a car. But thankfully, borrowers have been given some hope with the news of the Biden-Harris administration's three-part debt relief plan. So the administration has extended the payment and interest pause on federal loans until the end of the year. They've also announced a one-time debt relief of up to $10,000 and $20,000 for students who had Pell grants, who we know are the low-income students. As part of this debt relief, making the temporary waiver for the public service loan forgiveness available until the end of this month. So the public service loan forgiveness program is something we've heard a lot of concerns about how that was administered. Concern from people who made decisions about what to study and what career to pursue based on that program. And then really delivering on the promise to make to public servants by crediting previously discounted payments that were wrongfully discounted. So there's also going to be an income-driven repayment plan that's going to decrease future monthly payments for lower and middle income borrowers. So I'm really excited to see these changes, which we know will be transformational for thousands of borrowers in Oregon and millions across the country. Now I want to give a warm welcome to student loan and consumer protection expert, Mike Pierce. Mike is the executive director at the Student Borrower Protection Center, or SBPC. He's an attorney, a student borrower advocate, former senior regulator who joined SBPC after leaving the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, where he served as the deputy assistant director. Prior to that, Mike served as a staffer, member of Congress, and also worked at the U.S. Department of Education. So we're thrilled to have him with us. And Mike, excited to have you join us. Actually, 2 years in a row. Thank you for coming back to share another round of great news and information for borrowers.
Thank you so much for having me, Congresswoman, and thank you for all of your leadership to get us to this place. I think it is really safe to say that we would not have all of these exciting opportunities to cancel debt for folks if it wasn't for your leadership for many, many years fighting on the side of people with student debt in Oregon and across the country. So thank you for having me. Thanks for the chance to talk today. I am going to share my screen now, and we can get into the meat of these opportunities to cancel debt for lots of folks across Oregon. I should also note that I'm an Oregonian. I'm coming to you tonight from Northeast Portland. Even though the Student Borrower Protection Center is based in Washington, D.C., this is home for me. So it's awesome to be able to talk about getting Oregonians' debts canceled. We are here to talk about a couple different exciting opportunities to get folks' debts canceled. I'm going to spend most of the next 20 minutes or so talking about the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program and how public service workers in Oregon have this second chance just for a few more weeks to get their debts canceled. But I am also going to talk about the extremely exciting news that came down from the White House just a month ago, that the vast majority of people with student debt have the opportunity to get either $10,000 or $20,000 worth of debt canceled. There's a little bit of complication between how public service loan forgiveness relates to this new initiative, and I want to try to talk through that just a little bit too today to make sure that folks have the most accurate information possible. But I will also note that forgivemystudentdebt.org is a website that we run along with American Federation of Teachers, National Education Association, AFSCME, the International Brotherhood of Teamsters, the National Association of Social Workers, the American Association of University Professors, and other partners. And that has dozens and dozens of frequently asked questions about the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program and this limited opportunity to get your debt canceled if you work in public service. It also has about 36 frequently asked questions about this new initiative that the president announced. It has short instructional videos that can help walk you through all of the steps that I'm going to talk about today. So I will say that website 5 more times in the next 20 minutes. It's forgivemystudentdebt.org. I will also note one more time too that there is a list of upcoming webinars. So if I brush through something quickly and you want to hear somebody on our team do it again live, we are going to do 3 or 4 more of them between now and the end of the month. Some of them are on West Coast time, some of them are on East Coast time. So check one out. There are also recorded versions of a longer and more detailed version of this presentation available online. So with that, I'm going to jump into this. So what is the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program? This was created back in 2007, signed into law by President Bush, and this was, until very recently, the biggest opportunity for the most people to get their debts canceled. So anybody that works in public service, and I'll talk about what that means under the law in just a sec, has this opportunity to get their debt canceled. And public service is defined so broadly that it actually covers 1/4 of the US workforce. It doesn't matter what you do, it just matters who you work for. So you could be a lawyer working in the general counsel's office for a school district, or you could be a nurse working in the bedside at a hospital. Both are considered public service workers for the purpose of this program, as long as you have the right kind of loan, which is under the law a federal direct loan, and I'll talk about how that's changed temporarily. If you have the right type of repayment plan, and that's what the Congresswoman was talking about before, an income-driven repayment plan. And I'll talk about how that's changed temporarily too. And again, you have to work full-time for a public service organization. So that is any federal, state, or local government agency, any public school districts, any branch of the U.S. Armed Services. So being a service member is public service work, of course. And there's a whole bunch of other kinds of nonprofits, any 501c3 nonprofit, and many other types of nonprofits that do specific kinds of services. And once again, if you work for one of those, whether that's a public hospital or a college, it doesn't matter what you do there, as long as that nonprofit is performing a specific kind of public service. You have to do all these things, and you have to do them every month for 120 months, and that's how you get your debt canceled. And as you might imagine, that's complicated. There's lots of tricks and traps along the way. The Education Department mishandled the early years of this program to such an extraordinary degree that Congress has been trying to get them to fix it for the better part of a decade. And the student loan industry has routinely, right up until now, provided people with wrong information about how these rules work. And so I'm going to talk about what's changed temporarily, but I'm also going to talk about the road ahead that looks a lot better for folks than what we just went through. This program is working because of the changes the Biden administration put in place. More than 200,000 public service workers across the country have had their debts canceled in just 11 months. That's compared to fewer than 10,000 people over the prior 14 years. So it is actually working. It's working at scale. More than 2 million public service workers have gotten some additional credit over the course of the past year that they wouldn't have had previously. These are folks that were knocked off track because they got bad information from a student loan company, or had their paperwork mishandled, or couldn't navigate the administrative burden associated with the program. So millions of people are benefiting from what I'm about to talk about. Hundreds of thousands are now debt-free. We have a limited window to help everybody get their debts canceled that works in public service. So if you just stick with me, I'm going to use some jargon. I'm going to apologize in advance for it. The student loan system is complicated. There's lots of terms of art. It can be very confusing. And so I do want to just offer that little disclaimer at the top that if things seem complicated, they probably are. The Congresswoman and I are both here to try to answer as many of your questions as we can today, but there's lots and lots and lots of Q&A available on our website at forgivemystudentdebt.org. I should also note that what I said before about having to make payments, that's true except for right now. So back at the beginning of the pandemic, Congress stepped in and paused student loan payments for nearly everyone that has a federal student loan, including everyone that was on track for public service loan forgiveness, because you have to have one of these kinds of loans to be able to get on track for public service loan forgiveness. And so for borrowers whose payments have been paused going back to March of 2020, that time counts towards public service loan forgiveness. That was the law that Congress passed. It was extended by executive action 7 times between Donald Trump and President Biden. And we are now in this place where America's core of public service workers have received nearly 3 years of credit without having to make a single payment towards public service loan forgiveness, which is a huge deal. You do still need to be working in public service over this period to get credit. So you have to meet these other requirements for the programs. Lots of folks have lost their job during the pandemic or had a reduction of hours, particularly early on. And so there may be some complication there. I'll talk about what the Biden administration has done to make it easier in just a second. But just note that the normal rules for the payment pause, the way that this was treated, except for this brief window I'm about to mention, did require you to keep working full-time in public service. But as long as you were doing that, the pause on loan payments should count towards public service loan forgiveness for everybody. I want to just spend 1 minute talking about what the Congresswoman mentioned about how people have been knocked off track trying to get access to public service loan forgiveness in the past. And I'm not saying this to point blame. I'm happy to talk about that if folks have questions about who's responsible, but mostly I just want to acknowledge that there are probably lots of folks on this workshop today who tried and failed to get debt relief, even though it was promised to them under the law. And that's the normal experience. That's most people. Most folks who are working in public service who raised their hand and said, I think it's time for you to cancel my debt, were told no by the Trump administration over the course of the first 4 years that the program allowed people to apply for debt cancellation. 98 out of every 100 who applied were rejected. In the very beginning, it was 99 out of 100. There were some tweaks made along the way, pushed that all the way down to 97 out of 100. And so the president comes into office with this campaign promise to fix this mess for public service workers. And one of the first things the education department does is open up its doors and say to America's public service workers, please share your story about how this wasn't working for you and what we can do to fix it. I'm not going to spend time talking about what the administration heard from folks, but I would just say that the stories were heartbreaking, and they were really just example after example after example of folks in Oregon and folks across the country who thought they had a right to get their debt canceled and were told no 10 years into their career after spending thousands or tens of thousands of dollars making payments towards their loans. And so we find ourselves in this place where this is actually one of the best examples of government being responsive to people that I've ever seen in my 15 years doing this work. People asked for help, and President Biden and Democrats listened. And they announced something called the time-limited waiver of public service loan forgiveness requirements, which is a name that only government could come up with. But what it actually means is that all of these tricky ticky-tack things that I just mentioned about how the law works are going to be swept away, but for a limited time only. And it's going to allow the millions of folks who work in public service and have done everything that they were told to raise their hand and get credit towards public service loan forgiveness, but they have to act now. I'm going to mention this date, October 31st, Halloween, the end of this month. over and over and over again today. And that's because that's your window to act. We've had 11 months to try to get as many people on track as we could. I am so glad that you are here with us today because there is still time, but I'm going to talk about what it means to get on track. It doesn't mean getting your debt canceled by the end of the month. Anyone who starts that process today is not going to get their debt canceled by the end of the month, but you're going to get in line. And we just need you to get in line. And if it takes 6 months to get processed, if it takes a year to get processed, that's okay. The administration has said over and over again, as long as you get in line, you will get your debt canceled eventually. So what do you have to do to get in line? We are going to talk about what's changed and who benefits. That means everybody that has any kind of federal student loan is going to need to get in line. Anybody that works in public service and is enrolled in any kind of payment plan is going to need to get in line. So you could have gotten one of these couple requirements wrong in the beginning of your career or even last week, and there's an opportunity to make things right because for this limited period of time, the government is just going to give you credit no matter what kind of student loan you have, as long as it's a federal loan, and no matter what kind of payment plan you're in, even if it's not income-driven repayment. But to get that credit, you have to take a couple different specific actions. So we're going to talk about those. I'm sure we're going to answer some questions about those as well. It is not completely automatic. You have to take action. At the beginning of this process last fall, when this was first announced, there were some people who the government had records for already and who automatically got their debts canceled, about 40,000 people across the country. Great news for those folks. That's all done. Everyone else needs to act now. So if you are here, don't expect anything to happen for you automatically. You're going to have to raise your hand and get in line. People that are the most likely to miss out are people with older federal student loans made by banks or by Sallie Mae back before 2010, and that are still owned by a private entity. And I am going to talk about how this intersects with Biden's commitment to cancel up to $20,000 of student debt for everybody. There's a really hard set of choices that folks might have to make, specifically those people. That's a relatively small slice of the pie of outstanding student loan borrowers, but it's part of who we're trying to talk to today. If you're one of those borrowers that has one of these older loans and you also have direct loans, the other kind of loan that most people have, newer loans made after 2010, to make the most of the public service loan forgiveness waiver, you might have to forego up to $20,000 for the debt relief, which is a really tough decision. It's certainly not something that Congresswoman Bonamici was pushing for. It's certainly not something that borrower advocates were pushing for. We're in a really weird spot with the way these programs work together. I will talk about that with a little more detail in a couple of slides, but I will also note now and again later on that we are going to have a workshop just for folks that are considering those trade-offs. That's going to be posted up on forgivemystudentdebt.org. We're going to do one in late October and a second one in early November to be able to answer questions for folks. So just know that there is more to come. I also don't know that we have the final word from the administration about whether this is actually going to be as hard as maybe it appears it's going to be at first blush. So I just want to flag that there are, for this specific kind of borrower, and I am going to come back to this one more time in a couple slides, there might be some trade-offs to think about. But for everybody else, we're going to talk about how to get your debt canceled, and it's pretty straightforward. So I will say again and again and again, you have until October 31st to raise your hand to get in line. That doesn't mean you have to have your debt canceled. That doesn't mean you even have to submit all your paperwork. You just have to do a couple of different things here to be able to get in line and tell the government you want to get your debt canceled. What do you need to do? You need to figure out first if you work for a qualified public service employer. So I mentioned before that is any branch of the federal, state, or local government, any agency, federal, state, or local government, any branch of the U.S. Armed Forces, any public school district, any 501c3 nonprofit, and lots and lots and lots of other kinds of nonprofits. So together, that's a quarter of the US workforce. It's tens of millions of people who work for qualified employers. You also need to figure out what kind of loans you have. If you're one of those borrowers that has to do this special set of extra steps to make older loans count for public service loan forgiveness. And then you have to tell the government that you work in public service. And once again, there are points along the way here where you will have done what you need to do to get in line. Nobody's going to finish all three of these steps here to be able to actually get their debt canceled by the end of the month. You don't need to. You just need to get in line. So I'm going to talk first about how to confirm employers. I'm going to do this very quickly, but for the next couple of segments of this presentation. We have longer and slower instructional videos on forgivemystudentdebt.org that can help you walk through each of these steps. And once again, the Congresswoman and I are going to answer some questions in about 10 minutes when I'm done with this chunk of the presentation. So stay tuned, stay with me. I apologize in advance again for the jargon, and just know that there are resources out there that will go slower and go step by step. It doesn't need to be overwhelming. And yes, everyone finds it confusing because the program is just complicated. So please stick with me. We're going to try to work through this. So first, how do you figure out if you have an employer that counts? The good news here is that this is much, much easier than it was even 3 or 4 years ago. And that's because the Department of Education has created this tool on studentaid.gov that allows you to look up all of the employers that have previously been recognized because other public service workers have certified their service with the government. To do that, you go to studentaid.gov, you go down to public service loan forgiveness on the menu, and you open up the public service loan forgiveness help tool. And what that lets you do is match the tax ID for your employer, the employer identification number, or EIN. You'll find that on your W-2. You might also have it on your pay stub. It might also be on your employer's website. HR will certainly have it. There's lots of ways to get this number. But once you have this number, you plug it in, and the tool will tell you whether the government has recognized this employer before. And for anyone that works for the federal government or a state government agency or a big nonprofit or even a mid-sized nonprofit, odds are that somebody has walked down this path before you and that you will be able to get verification in real time that you are good to go. People that work for smaller government agencies, local governments, small nonprofits, they may not be in here. That's okay. This is the first point where I'm going to say, this is how you raise your hand. So if your employer is not matched in this database, you will have an opportunity to enter information about your employer and have the education department determine whether you're eligible or not. You can do that and do nothing else. And that's one of the ways you can raise your hand and get in line for the public service loan forgiveness waiver. Because you've logged in to studentaid.gov to reach this page, the government will know that you uniquely have submitted an employer. And that's one of the ways you can get on track. We recommend folks do a couple of these different things just to make doubly sure that the government knows you're trying to get in line to get access to this limited waiver. But this is what they say is all you need to do. So if you make it to this point and this is the only thing you do, you should still be able to do all the rest of that stuff later. Most people will find their employers here and they'll move on to the next step. Everyone should do this next step, even if they haven't matched an employer. You should still go back to studentloans.gov and figure out what kind of student loan you have. If you have a federal direct loan already, whether that's a direct consolidation loan or a loan that you borrowed directly from the Department of Education to pay for college or grad school, you don't have to take any more steps here to make those loans eligible. Those are loans that start eligible. You still have to certify that you work in public service, and we'll get to that in a second. But the making your loans count part is really easy for you, but that's not everybody. There are several million people out there that have other kinds of federal student loans that are not direct loans. And you will see them when you go to studentaid.gov and view your student aid dashboard. This person's account here, they've already taken steps to make older loans qualify for public service loan forgiveness. They used to have a Perkins loan. You see that sitting here with a $0 balance. That means that they used this direct consolidation loan they have to pay off that old Perkins loan. This is a success story here. This is what it looks like at the end of the process. But you might see a Perkins loan or a FFEL loan or a guaranteed loan, or there's other kind of jargon, a Stafford loan that might describe a loan that needs to have extra action taken. If you have one of those loans here, if you have something other than a direct loan, you then have to do what's called consolidating to make that loan turn into a direct loan that can be canceled under the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program. And I will pause on that for just a second and talk about why. That is so important because up until October of last year, if you consolidated, you only got credit for the months of public service work you did after you finished the consolidation. So everyone has always had to take this extra step to turn these older loans into new loans that count for PSLF. But because of the rules of the program, up until the Biden administration, you never got credit for public service work you did until you took that step. It was all or nothing. And if you missed out on that step at the beginning of your career, it didn't matter whether you were doing what was asked of you. It didn't matter if you were serving in your community, making payments, doing all the things the program requires. If you didn't take that step on day one, you lost credit until you took that step. And that's changed now, but only until the end of this month. And so I'm going to talk about how to consolidate in just a second. But for borrowers with those older loans, this is the way you get the most credit possible towards public service loan forgiveness. And for folks with older loans who have served in public service for a decade or more, you can apply to have your debt canceled right now. It might be complicated to figure out what kind of loan you have. If it's not clear from your dashboard, there's also a way to download more information about your student loans, and you can look at the report that you get from this screen and find out some tricks on how to actually make sense of what comes out of that screen and figure out what kind of loans you have. Go to forgivemystudentdebt.org. We have more instruction on what it means to download your student aid data and to actually take a look at your student loans and figure out what other steps you have to take. If you have decided that you have the kind of loan that needs to be consolidated, so you have one of those older loans that was taken out before 2010, made by a bank or by Sallie Mae, or if you have a Perkins loan made by your school, you have to do this thing called consolidation to turn that loan into a new direct loan and get on track to get your debt canceled. You do that at the same place that we've been at for the past little bit here. We're back at studentaid.gov. And instead of going to public service loan forgiveness or my student aid dashboard, you're going to go to Consolidate My Loans. And there is a very simple, very straightforward application here. This is the easiest part of this process. You just kind of click through, fill out the information, and you're done. But I will offer a word of warning at the end. But just note that you can do this in a single sitting. It takes about 20 minutes. There's some information right on the page about how you need to do this to qualify for the public service loan forgiveness waiver. It is the only way for folks with these older loans to actually get credit. And this is another way for you to raise your hand and get in line to benefit from the public service loan forgiveness waiver. So we recommend you do both of those things. Match your employer and fill out a form, and also consolidate your loan if you need to. Try to do them both by the end of the month. None of it's going to get processed. It's going to take time for this to get processed. It's going to get time to talk about the next thing for that to get processed. But you have to start these processes. And that way you can be doubly sure you're going to get credit to get your debt canceled. So what does it mean to apply? You fill out some stuff. It's a web form. You key in your information. You can do it in a single sitting. It should just be stuff you already know. The form itself will bring in information about your student loans. You will select the identity of the student loan company you want once you go through this process. I will note Mohela, M-O-H-E-L-A, Mohela, probably a name you've never heard of before. This is the company that the government pays to manage the public service loan forgiveness program now. That changed this past July. Prior to that was this company called Fed Loan Servicing. So some of you guys that are old hands that have been trying to make heads or tails of this process for years were probably somebody that had Fed Loan Servicing as their company. You've now been switched to Mohela. All the old Fed Loan customers are now with Mohela. You should start off at Mohela because they're the ones that are going to be counting your payments. And so we'll get to counting payments in a sec, but just note that you have a chance to pick your company. You should pick Mohela. You also can pick your payment plan. That doesn't mean you have to start making payments right away. Everybody's loans are paused until the end of the year. Congress put this in place. The administration has extended this now 7 times. They say this is the final extension of the payment pause and that people are going to start having to make payments again come next year. I would say never, but you should plan on it. And because you should plan on it, you can also plan on the fact that you won't have to make payments in 2022. So picking a payment plan here, you should pick income-driven repayment. That'll set you up for success next year, but you're not choosing to have to make payments now. You're just picking the payment plan that you'll be enrolled in whatever point in the future the student loan system starts again. Now here, I'm going to do this warning. I'm going to do it one more time. There is big, scary red letters on the screen, and that is because we don't have all the information we need to provide you with what you need to make a totally informed decision here. So anybody that started this process back before last week doesn't have to worry about the screen, doesn't have to worry about complicated trade-offs. If you consolidated your loans before September 29th, you get both, no matter what. You have made the action you need to make to get on track for public service loan forgiveness. You also have preserved your eligibility for broad debt cancellation, for cancellation of up to $20,000 for everybody. If you are just starting this process now, though, it appears that if you mix these two kinds of loans together, older guaranteed loans made by Sallie Mae or a bank or your school through the Perkins program, with a newer loan the government already owns, that you will lose out on your right to get up to $20,000 for the debt canceled, but it does not affect your eligibility for public service loan forgiveness. So this is really complicated. I did that very quickly. I do not imagine that was a satisfying explanation for a single person that was on this call. I want to note that we are having 2 workshops for folks who are in this boat and trying to make heads or tails of it. We are going to do everything we can to get real answers from the administration about how to make this choice. Right now, one is scheduled for October 20th. The other is scheduled for November 3rd. So just stay tuned. Tune in with us on the 20th if you can. There's more information on forgivemystudentdebt.org. We are also going to be tweeting about this to try to get folks that are in this boat to join us to learn more. So just know that we don't have complete information. There are some risks here to doing the things I just told you to do if you are one of the borrowers who has both of these kinds of loans. If you only have the older loans, consolidate. Don't think twice about it. If you don't have any of the older loans, ignore everything I just said. You're good. So most people are okay, but there are specific groups of people, and there's a lot of them out there, that are in this boat. And so tune in for more coming soon from us. Certifying employment. This is the last thing I'm going to walk through with you, and then a little bit about some tricks and traps, and then we're going to do some Q&A here. So this is the most important thing you can do here. This is the way you tell the government that you work in public service and actually get them to process public service loan forgiveness for you. So we are back at studentaid.gov. We are back in the same place where you looked up your employer. This time, you're going to find your employer in here. You're going to match them. And then you're going to use this tool to generate a form that your employer also has to sign. Some information is going to get filled out automatically because the government already knows about your employer. Some of it, like your employment start date and end date, or whether you're still employed, that you're going to have to fill out yourself. You're going to have to print that out or send it electronically to your employer to sign like a human being signature, not an electronic signature. So that's either with a pen on a hard copy and then scan back in, or that is scribbling your name on a trackpad. So you can scribble your name on a trackpad. Your employer can scribble their name on a trackpad. That counts. But you can't e-sign it. You can't docu-sign it. You can't use like an Adobe Acrobat certified signature. All of those will get rejected by the government. The only way you can sign this form is to squiggle your finger on a trackpad or to sign it with a pen. Once you do that, you can submit it to this company, Mohela. If you are currently a Mohela customer, you're able to do that electronically. You can just upload it to Mohela through your online account. If you are not a Mohela customer, the only way you can submit this is through US mail or through fax. And I will throw the fax and mail number up on here. We have that information up on forgivemystudentdebt.org. That is available on studentaid.gov. It is available on Mohela's website. I will also note that if you are one of those borrowers who couldn't match their employer, and so they couldn't generate that form on studentaid.gov, you can go to Mohela's website and print the form out there. So they have a blank form you can just fill out. And again, I preach doing all of it because you have a few weeks to do this. I would try to match your employer. I would consolidate your loans if you can, and I would print out a hard copy of this form and have your employer sign it and mail it in. It doesn't hurt to do all the things. It's a lot of time. Not everybody's going to be able to do that. That's okay. The government says you just need to do one of them to be able to get in line, but we advise folks to do as many of them as you have time to do. I will note again here that like this is 2022, and I just asked you to fax a thing. It's not going to be easy for everybody. And the process involves the government scanning hundreds of thousands of forms at breakneck speed, and mistakes are inevitably going to get made. So when you do this, if you submit this by fax, keep the receipt from the fax. If you submit this by US mail, go to the post office and do it certified mail so you have a certificate that shows it was sent. If ever there's a dispute down the road about what documents the government has, you've got some evidence that you did the right thing, and they're going to err on the side of giving you the debt relief you're entitled to under the law. So keeping receipts is always a good rule when dealing with the Department of Education. It is especially a good rule right now. What happens next? You're going to submit this thing to Mohela. Mohela is going to process it. It's going to tell you that you work in public service. It is also going to tell you that it is now your student loan company. Then it's going to tell you how many months of credit towards Pslf you get. I'm going to warn you a little bit in just a second about a couple ways this goes wrong for people temporarily. But in the end, you're going to get credit for the amount of time you worked. They're not going to care about what payment plan you were in. They're not going to care about when you consolidated your loans, as long as you did it. Or if you have a direct loan, they're just going to count the months you worked in public service. And if it's been 10 years, they'll cancel your debt. If it's been less than 10 years, you'll get credit for how much you've worked. And Mohela is the one that will tell you how much credit you've actually earned towards public service loan premiums. So I'm going to flag a couple quick things here, and then we're going to answer some questions. The first is this. Lots of people make mistakes on these forms. They are confusing. They are complicated. They involve you pulling back from the recesses of your brain, how long you've worked for your current employer, when you started, if it's an older employer, when you ended. People make mistakes. Addresses change. Don't do this. Don't hand correct these forms and sign next to them. Lawyers especially, I don't know how many public interest lawyers there are on this call, but like lawyers love to do this. I'm a lawyer, I can say that. And it is fine on a contract to make a handwritten change or an initial next to it. The government scanners do not know what to do with this. They will reject your form and make you start over. So just work clean here. It is much better for you to have to go back to your employer and have them sign a certification a second time than it is to have to wait 4 or 5 months for this to get processed and then be told to start over. Just work clean the first time. I should also note, as you're thinking about your employer's bureaucracy, folks that have big employers, there are people in Oregon that are working at Kaiser, for example, that might have a few weeks to wait to get one of these forms signed. If you have a big employer and there's a bureaucracy and it takes time to get a signature, don't worry. One of the ways you raise your hand to get in line is just printing that form off from that tool. If you've printed the form off from the tool, the government knows they're waiting on a form from you. And so you'll still be able to take advantage of this, even if you don't mail it back or fax it in before October 31st. That's okay. And I say that at this point of the presentation because this is one of the reasons why you might be not be able to get it in on time. Just fill it out a second time. It'll be okay. You might also see information from your student loan company or on some piece of the government's website that doesn't seem right. Everything I have told you today is accurate as of October 6th. There are old forms and old boilerplate and old information on bills that may seem different. It is old, it is wrong, it is okay that it is wrong. It does not mean that I am wrong. You need to trust us that we've got this right. There is accurate information on studentaid.gov. There is accurate information on forgivemystudentdebt.org. There are also just lots of old documents out there that have wrong info. The last thing I will say is there is this bug on the tool for folks that have these older loans and are waiting for a consolidation to process. It might not recognize that you are eligible to get debt cancellation right now because you're waiting for an older loan to get through a consolidation. And you'll just have to check no at the screen to generate your form. That's okay. You're not certifying anything to the government here. You're not lying on a government form. You're just trying to work through a bug and a tool to get to the form you actually have to sign. So I just like to flag that for folks because it confuses people. It might say you haven't worked for 10 years. You may know damn well that you have. You're right. They are wrong. It is fine. Don't stress out about it. So this is my word of warning on the help tool. And then lastly, you might get some letters from Mohela that have the wrong information on them about how many months you've certified. It's taking time to process these things, and sometimes they happen in batches. And so especially if you've certified multiple employers, you just might see things along the way that say you only have 1 month when you know you have 100. Don't freak out. It'll be okay. Trust the process. We'll get through it. There are places to go for help. So just know that we hear from folks every single day that have wrong payment counts, and then eventually get correct payment counts, and then eventually get their debt canceled. So you just need to bear with it. It's complicated. I am going to remind you, one more time that October 31st is your deadline to act here. Do the things we talked about. You will get credit no matter what kind of loan you have. You will get credit as long as a federal loan. You will get credit no matter what kind of payment plan you were in, as long as you were making payments. There are lots of kind of complexities along the way. This was the short version of this presentation. So again, check out forgivemystudentdebt.org for more on all of this stuff. If you have questions about what to do with forbearance and deferment, there's information there. If you have questions about other kinds of payment plans, there's information there. So we jumped through some stuff that's in the longer version of the presentation. You can watch the big one if you really want to. You can watch the instructional videos if you really want to. Forgivemystudentdebt.org. And then if you have trouble, the Congresswoman's district office is here to help you. There are places you can go for help. The Education Department has a phenomenal student loan ombudsman who helps people every day navigate this process. You can submit a complaint to the Department of Education at studentaid.gov/complaint. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which is my old employer, they regulate the student loan companies like Mohela. If somebody's lied to you, or you feel like they've tried to cheat you out of your rights, or you run into a student loan debt relief scam, consumerfinance.gov/complaint, or the amazing Oregon Attorney General's office. There's also a student loan ombudsman right here in Oregon, and they have been on the job for less than a year, but they are a seasoned student loan advocate and somebody that I've worked with for a really long time named Lane Thompson, who sits at Oregon's Department of Consumer and Business Services. They can also help you. So there are lots of places to go for help if something seems wrong. And I think I want to give a extremely short update on broad cancellation. We've already talked about this a couple different times, and then we're going to answer some questions. So that was everything on public service loan forgiveness. The other exciting thing that's happening here is that back in August, President Biden said that for nearly everyone with a federal student loan, this is basically everyone but high earners, the Biden administration will unilaterally cancel up to $20,000 worth of student loans for anyone that has a loan that the federal government owns. So if your loan was paused during the pandemic, you are eligible for this debt relief. For some folks, this will happen automatically. About 8 million people have income information on file already with the Department of Education. You can opt out of this. So you'll get a notice that this is happening and you'll have 10 days to opt out of it. If you're one of those 8 million people who's going to get automatic debt relief, everyone else will have to apply. The reason we're talking about this so quickly, though, is that the application's not up yet. So there's actually not a step you can take quite yet. Stay tuned. I imagine we'll do another one of these as soon as the application's live, and we can walk through that application too. We expect to see the application sometime in mid to late October. And the first folks should expect to get their debts canceled sometime a few weeks after that. So it's going to be very simple. It's going to be on studentaid.gov as well. It's just not out yet. So stay tuned for more.
Thank you so much, Mike. What a wealth of knowledge. We're so grateful. Kelsey, I know we have some questions and I think you're going to be moderating those. Is that right?
Yes, thank you, Congresswoman.
Okay.
Thank you, Mike. The Congresswoman and Mike look forward to taking your questions. We will be taking a mix of live and pre-submitted questions. If you'd like to ask a question, please click on the Q&A at the bottom of the screen and type in your question. I'll read those questions aloud. And we may not get to all of our questions today, but if you need further assistance, please contact our office or your member of Congress. If you live in Northwest Oregon, you can reach us by going to bonamici.house.gov and then clicking on contact. For more information or assistance from the Student Borrower Protection Center, go to protectborrowers.org. Our first question today is from Paul from McMinnville, who says, I'm grateful for my daughter to get a break from student loan debt, but my family, who thinks negatively of the forgiveness, continues to say Biden is paying for this by raising taxes. Is that true? Can you share how this is being paid for?
Thank you, Kelsey, and thank you, Paul, for asking that question. It's a really important one. I think I want to start by saying that President Biden has pledged not to raise taxes on any individual making more than $400,000 a year. And this loan forgiveness is not being paid for by raising taxes on working Oregonians and Americans. It's actually, rather than looking at it as how do you pay for it, it's a reduction in federal revenue. But with the Inflation Reduction Act, which I was proud to help get over the finish line, there are lots of provisions that are helping to lower costs for Americans. It's actually going to reduce the federal budget deficit. by more than $300 billion over the next decade. Great provisions in there to help, for example, senior prescription drug care and lowering costs of energy efficiency. There's just a lot in there that's going to help lower costs. But I also want to say that student loan debt forgiveness is really going to be good for the economy, because so many people now are holding back on buying homes, buying cars, changing careers, because they're trapped because of the debt. So it's actually going to be good for our economy in the long run. And I also want to add too that I don't have the specific numbers on this, Mike might know, but most of these people have actually made payments. It's not like their entire debt is being paid off. They've been making payments. As I mentioned, that the compounding that happens. I've heard from people who said, I started out borrowing $30,000. I've been making payments for years and I still owe $30,000. So it's not like money has not been coming in. So with all of those things in consideration, I can understand why somebody would ask that question, but just to make sure you know that this is not being paid for by raising taxes on hardworking Americans. The tax changes in the Inflation Reduction Act were really about changing the corporate tax structure for very large corporations. So, Mike, do you want to add anything to that?
I thought that was a perfect answer. The only thing I would add to that is just a data point to kind of footnote your point about how many people get stuck in the student loan debt trap. For every borrower, for every 2 borrowers who pay off their loans in 12 years, 3 more actually owe more money than they first borrowed 12 years later. So there are tens of millions of people out there that have been making payments, have been doing everything that's asked of them, and have found themselves even deeper in debt. And part of why it's so exciting that the president's canceling student debt for so many people is that those borrowers are finally being recognized as having done everything right and just having gotten stuck behind a failed public policy.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you. Our next question is a live one from our chat. I was told that I do not qualify for the forgiveness program because I'm still a student, though I'm working in education. Is that accurate?
I'm going to let Mike start with this one and then I'll add to it.
Sure. So I think it depends on which loan forgiveness program. So I will take those in parts. For the promise by the president to cancel up to $20,000 worth of student debt, current students are eligible. The only students that are not eligible are students who only took out loans for the current school year. If you're a sophomore in college, loans from your freshman year count. If you're a second year social work master's student, loans from your first year count. So nearly everyone that has a federal student loan is either a continuing student or a current student loan borrower in repayment. So virtually everyone will get that up to $20,000 worth of debt relief. Public service loan forgiveness, it's slightly more complicated. If you've left school and gone back to school, you can get credit towards public service loan forgiveness for the time that you were working if you had older loans that you were paying on. You can also choose to keep making payments on your student loans while you're in school, if you're working full-time while you're in school. And that's really typical for teachers, social workers, healthcare workers. Lots of folks go back to school while they're working full-time. But you have to opt into that. You have to contact your student loan servicer and say, I do not want to defer my loans. I want to be making payments on them. And when I say payments, right now, nobody has payments due. So saying you want to make payments doesn't actually mean you get a bill. And there are lots of folks that did this at the beginning of the pandemic. If you missed your chance to do that, going back to March of 2020, you can do that retroactively. You can't go back further than that, but your loan status is kind of malleable right now because of all these special rules related to the pandemic. So if you've been in school for a couple of years, you can retroactively opt out of that school deferment and instead just have your payments paused like everyone else and get credit towards public service loan forgiveness. It's more complicated if you have one of those older loans. There's more information up on forgivemystudentdebt.org about that. But if you don't, if you're a borrower that has a newer loan and you're in school, this is only true if you've gone back to school. If you're just in school for the first time, it doesn't work. But if you've gone back to school, you can kind of opt out of that deferment and get credit towards public service loan forgiveness.
And I just want to add, thank you, Mike. That was a great answer and very thorough. I just want to add that for current students, we're working on college affordability. A lot of what we're talking about today is a short-term solution, but we need long-term solutions as well. And we're working on that in the Education Labor Committee. I mentioned how much higher the costs are now than they were even 20 years ago. I was a state legislator. I encourage everyone to advocate to their state legislators, House and Senate, to invest in higher education at the state level. Also at the federal level, where we provide the financial aid. I'm a big supporter of doubling the Pell grant, reforming work study, so it's helping students who are truly in need, and making sure that we have programs that make higher education more affordable, so that we don't trap people in this student loan debt trap. And there are lots of proposals out there that we're looking at in terms of going forward for the long term as well.
Thank you. Our next question is from Macias from Portland. As a Pell Grant recipient and a public service employee, can I receive forgiveness for $20,000 and also have the remainder forgiven?
I'm going to let Mike take this for the technical part, but it's my understanding as long as you meet those tests, you'll be able to do that.
Yeah, you don't have to choose. The only exception to that is what I mentioned before about borrowers with these older loans that are maybe wrapping them together to get public service loan forgiveness. But if you're not one of those borrowers, you don't have to choose between these programs. You will get $20,000 up to $20,000, $10 if you're not a Pell recipient, this year from President Biden, and then you can get the whole rest of your debt canceled under public service loan forgiveness when you're eligible.
Our next question is from Courtney from the Portland Tribune. The October 31st deadline is only for those seeking PSLF, correct? Additionally, what do the recent lawsuits mean for this plan for broad debt cancellation?
It's my understanding, and Mike will correct me if I'm wrong, that the October 31st deadline is yes for the public service PSLF program. We're of course watching the litigation challenging the debt forgiveness program. I am confident that the Biden administration has done the work to confirm that this is an appropriate executive order that is putting this program into place. And at the same time, we're also, as I mentioned, working on legislation for the long term to make sure that college is affordable and accessible.
Great, thank you. Our next question is from Elizabeth, who asks, please discuss the refund of payments made during the payment pause. I've heard you need to request it and then it would be automatic.
So I think there's actually two questions buried in there. The first is who's eligible for a refund. You are eligible to get any payments that you've made voluntarily back from the federal government if you made those payments on a loan that was paused and you made those payments since March of 2020. 9 million people across the country have made what the government considers voluntary payments over the course of this time period. And you're eligible to get them back, whether or not you're going to get this new debt cancellation the president has announced. But for folks that paid off their loans or paid down their balance below the amount of money that you'd be eligible to have canceled, it makes a lot of financial sense for a lot of people to get that money back so they get the most cancellation they're eligible for. If you have a loan that has not been paid off completely, the government says they're just going to do this for you automatically. That means that they are going to process your refund at the same time they process your debt cancellation. So you get the most debt cancellation that you are legally eligible for. If you've paid off your loan completely, though, you do have to go through a different process. You have to contact your student loan company and do what's called reinstating some amount of your loan that you've paid off so that you benefit from debt cancellation. You have a right to do that, but there's steps you need to take. There's information about how to do that on forgivemystudentdebt.org. You should go check it out. We have step-by-step. It's not that hard. But if you've paid off your loan completely, you do have to take action. If you have not paid off your loan completely and your loan was paused, then this will happen for you automatically.
Great, thank you. Our next question is a live question from Sam, who asks, with periods of forbearance being counted toward PSLF under the limited waiver, will Mohela or the federal government evaluate the eligibility of those payments?
I'm going to give that one to Mike as well.
So it's actually a combination of the two. Both Mohela and the federal government will evaluate your eligibility for those months. Mohela will do a first pass based on the information that it has, but often there are parts of the waiver that will take a little bit of time to process, and it's federal employees that are doing some of the data matching and payment counting, and it's part of why that's a little bit clunky to get the final count. That count will come from Mohela. But it is a joint effort between career civil servants, the Office of Federal Student Aid, and this contractor, Mohela.
Great, thank you. Our next question is from Christine, who asks, does loan forgiveness apply for Parent Plus loans?
Mike, do you want to take that? And then I want to add something about the
Sure.
the FFEL.
So I would say the answer is it can, but it depends. It is not a simple answer. And in the interest of, I think, time here, I will say Parent Plus loans are eligible for public service loan forgiveness. They are not typically eligible for the waiver, which means that this extra payment counting folks are getting, parents are missing out on. There is another program the Biden administration announced that is based on problems with income-driven repayment that parents are eligible for. And there's more information on forgivemystudentdebt.org about what parents can do to benefit from the set of initiatives that the Biden administration has put in place. So the answer isn't no, but it's also not an easy yes.
Well, and I want to add to that, number one, that we're here to help my office, and I'll be giving that information soon again. So you have that, I have caseworkers who are helping on these issues. I also wanted to comment on the FFEL, the Family Federal Education Loans and the Perkins loans, because we've heard some concerns about that. And I know Mike knows about this as well. We've discussed with the Department of Education. So we learned recently that the commercially held FFEL and Perkins loans would not qualify for the $10,000 or $20,000 in debt relief. So we've been communicating with the Department of Education about this. This is a place where there was litigation pending, but I know that the Department of Education is exploring ways to continue eligibility for these borrowers. And so we're in contact with the administration as well as other organizations. I'm grateful that they're providing that the administration is working on this debt relief. We just want to make sure that it is broad and addressing those who are truly in need of the debt relief. So we're following up with the administration on that and looking forward to their response to our inquiries.
Our next question is from Victoria from Vernonia. With my Pslf application being delayed due to administrative errors, after certifying my employment, I finally got my application back on track and it was approved last year. I paid an additional year of loans that should have been forgiven. Does that get reimbursed with the waiver?
It should, as long as your loans were direct loans while you were making those payments, and those payments went to the Department of Education, like via Fed Loan Servicing or Mohela via your student loan company. Those payments should be refunded. Anything you've paid beyond the 120 payments you're required to make under the law get refunded back to you. If you were making those payments on one of those older loans and you were waiting for a consolidation application to process, unfortunately, those payments are not refundable. So it depends on what kind of loan you have, but most people that have a circumstance that sounds like what Victoria is describing should be able to get refunds for those extra payments.
And Victoria, if you would like some help, please don't hesitate to contact our office. We can help you through that process.
Thank you. I think we have time for one last question. Nathan from Hillsborough says, I support student loan forgiveness, but what are we doing about college affordability?
Oh, that's a great question, Nathan. And as I mentioned, we need long-term solutions as well as short-term solutions. And so college affordability is a priority. I serve on the Higher Education Subcommittee and the Education Labor Committee, and I mentioned doubling the Pell grant. There's a bill that's I'm co-sponsoring to not only double Pell grants, but also expand eligibility, make student loans less expensive and more affordable, fix the whole public service loan forgiveness program, and also address the interest issue that we mentioned, that compounding interest. I have also been working on, as I mentioned, federal work study, a program that has not been reformed for many years. It's a great way to help students pay for college while also aligning, if we're trying to align their work study jobs with their field of interest. So it's a kind of a win-win, help with paying for college, but also getting some work experience. So I also, again, encourage as a former state legislator, encourage the state legislature to invest in higher education. To me, education is one of the best investments we can make. So we need to make college more affordable and more accessible finances should not be a barrier for anyone who wants to go to college. So there's several of the things that we're working on and we'll continue to work on. We have seen, of course, some disinvestment by many states, but we need to partner with our state legislators as well, so that we have the investment at the state level, but also the programs at the federal level to help with affordability.
Thank you, Congresswoman, and thank you, Mike. I think that is the end of questions we have time for. Do you have any closing comments or anything else you'd like to add?
Well, I just want to thank you all for joining us today, and especially Mike. Thank you so much for your time, but also your expertise. Thank you for everyone who's joining. I know that those who have officially RSVP'd will get a follow-up email that will get a recording of today's presentation and the resources discussed. And I know there were a lot of helpful resources that Mike mentioned. The reminder again, the application for the one-time loan forgiveness will be available this month. The deadline for the public service loan forgiveness waiver is October 31st, and Mike walked through the steps there. And again, we don't have the application yet for the $10,000 or $20,000 debt relief, but we will get that information out as soon as it's available from the Department of Education and the administration. So you can sign up for weekly updates on the status of your application from the Department of Education at studentaid.gov. And again, the site that Mike mentioned is forgivemystudentdebt.org. And again, if you have any questions, follow-up questions, or you need assistance, further assistance, please don't hesitate to contact my district office in Beaverton. The number is 503-469-6010. And thank you again, Mike. Do you want to give a closing remark?
Just thank you very much for the chance to help out here. And we are here to help.
We so much appreciate your expertise. Thanks, Kelsey, for moderating. And thank you again, everyone, for joining us. Look forward to further conversations, and I wish you the best. Take care.